Hello, hope you're doing well. I'm going to continue on with Alice A. Bailey and the reading of Esoteric Psychology, Part 1, and reading along on the publisher's website. And in addition, going to put in some, I don't know how this is going to go over, but some documents that I went down a rabbit hole of declassified intelligence agency documents. Don't ask. But it comes full circle to this week. Today and this past week has been really bizarre in terms of energy and everyone's levels of angst. And I've had personal epiphanies and learning more about myself and kind of like seeing myself in a more like third person out of body to be like, whoa, that clicked. And then seeing how other people are responding to kind of what's going on in the world right now and just seeing like, whoa, that's clicking. And then kind of seeing how it coincides with this quest to control information throughout our history, and how many of us are reacting today actually is an offshoot of those efforts to control and sift and kind of like disseminate information, spoon feed it in a way that's going to frame the way that we see ourselves and the world around us. So all the more reason, and I'll make that make sense hopefully by reading this section and showing a few of these documents. But the idea is that I realized, which we'll get into in the reading in a second, is that this fight between religion and science, or this fight between what is hard fact, logical, and what is quickly dismissible as pseudoscience or woo-woo or whatever people like to call it, is maybe not even our own judgment or fight. Maybe that's not even what we should be focusing on at all, but it's been indoctrinated or programmed that way, and it's created so much divide and so much of the, but it's also been very tactical and very political. So anyways, going into this section here, I realize that this is probably, we're starting the next question and certain questions and the answers, which is, speaking of that debate, it's question 3 is, can the fact of the soul be proved? And so this section, Alice Bailey, or the Tibetan, as channeled through Alice Bailey, gives us the answer in what seems like 3 parts. The first being very much so the logical scientific vision of all the ways that academia has disproven the soul and that it exists. And then it moves into the section of proving or explaining phenomena as to what might undercut that. Like, if it's just an absolute no, then why does this happen? And then the final section, I'm having a brain fart on, but we'll get to it when we read it right now. But I just wanted to give that kind of preface here. And then I wanted to share, again, some of those documents, because it was really blown my mind to see just how much this is not even a question. This has been made a political question. And it's really a humanity question. Who am I? What are my capabilities and my powers? And how can that help me to live a more free, more full, more healthy, happy life, right? These are things that if we knew the fullness of who we were, we would be able to do X, Y, Z. But the debate has been put into these channels of us versus them, the scientists versus the spiritualists, or the spiritualists versus the religious, the academics versus the spiritualists, and all this other craziness. And then it's also been, this country versus this country, and this political ideology versus this one, and us trying to control this information to see how we could use it and militarize it and weaponize it, and just all this convoluted stuff that's been like, well, we need to slow down, take it back, and kind of see what we want to do with this information, because based on the Freedom of Information Act, there has been a declassification of documents, so they're available for us to see, and I have went down like a rabbit hole over the last 4 or 5 hours just reading through different declassified CIA documents, and truly has been fascinating. There's also on the tails of watching the Netflix docuseries Wormwood that came out. If you haven't seen that yet, I definitely recommend checking out that if you have stomach for it, and very interesting as well. Also deeply sad, but also like something we need to know and understand about our history. If we want to learn our history, we gotta know the full history, right? Anyways, I hope that throughout this read, this starts to kind of gel, and see what you think. So I'm going to do a screen share and go back into reading. Again, we're starting at question 3. Can the fact of the soul be proved? This is on page 90 of the actual text, if you have the book. The soul, and it just goes right into it, right? The soul has been satisfactorily disproved from the standpoint of academic science. What is satisfactorily? Just break it all down. In a way that fulfills expectations or needs. So there are some who have needed or expected to disprove the soul from an academic, scientific standpoint. That's something to keep in mind. The soul, and what is the soul? Let's see, according to this guy. It's the spiritual or immaterial part of a human being or animal regarded as immortal. It could also be seen as the emotional or intellectual energy or intensity, especially as revealed in a work of art or an artistic performance. Their interpretation lacked soul. So that's another key thing when we think about how people say, oh, that person they have soul, right? Or that music has soul, or that person is soulless, or they sold their soul, right? But from a scientific perspective, none of that means anything. It doesn't make any sense. It's been disproved in terms of it being an immortal and immaterial fact. I'm going to speed up, because if it takes this long to get there every second, we're going to be here all night. Thank you again for watching. The soul has been satisfactorily disproved from the standpoint of academic science. For ages, the search has gone on, with the object of the search, scientifically speaking, being laid on the demonstration of the location of the soul in the human body. That has been the emphasis and the important factor to the scientific mind, which is so different than that of its more mystically inclined brother. So much is said right there again in this paragraph right here, speaking to the rabbit hole that I just went down. The point of science, in order to satisfactorily disprove religion or the psychic phenomena or the craze of people believing in that which is unseen and having faith towards that unseen realm that isn't logical, hard and fact, scientific and material, they disprove it by looking for a physical location that can be demonstrated of the soul in the human body. That emphasis has been their most important factor. If the soul is real, show me its location in the body. couldn't find its location in the body, so satisfactorily disproved. This is a common question of scientific research where the point of the research is targeted towards a certain outcome. And when you use your mental faculties, you can always do that. You can drive results towards an outcome that you want. They said that that was done largely in the past with studies on cigarettes all the time before they were deemed to be toxic and harmful, poisonous. They would do studies and research pointed towards not finding that, not coming to that conclusion. I'm getting tongue-tied already. So when the research is done towards proving a certain outcome, it can sway the results. And so at that time, when this argument was, so for context, this book was written, first printing in 1936. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all that during that time, it was a huge issue between, religious groups and control, and then scientific freedom and autonomy and research and kind of trying to take back freedom in this. It was a very, very sensitive time. And so the goal of disproving religion became like the purpose of scientific research in many regards, many respects. So again, this is saying that straight out the gate, science has disproven the existence of the soul based on their search for a specific location for it in the human body. Whereas the more mystically inclined look for it and proof of it in a completely different way. Could that be why it hasn't been proven? Or again, this was in 1936. Continuing on. All research, especially, and then let me just check one thing. All research, especially that carried on lately in connection with the modern materialistic schools and with the fuller understanding of the mechanism of the human body, has tended to prove that the soul is a superstition, a defense mechanism, and that conscious thought, with all other higher manifestations of the human mind, and hence also the lower expressions of personality, selfhood, and conscious integration, can well be provided for and accounted for by man's present equipment of brain, nervous system, and the endocrine system. All these, in their turn, are understood to be the result of a long evolutionary and selective process. The wonder of the machine itself is divine in its completion and in its scope. From a primeval germ developing under the pressure of nature's laws and of environing conditions, plus a consistent adaptation to requirements and a most careful selection, man has developed. He now possesses a mechanism which is responsive to the natural world, to sensation, and to thought. That which is called the soul is regarded frequently as the result of this selective process and as constituting the sum total of the responsive and discriminating powers of the cells and organs of the body, plus the life principle. So this is all just saying that everything is very scientifical. We can point to the brain, the nervous system, the endocrine system, and our adaptation over the years to explain away anything that you could possibly deem as a soul. In my mind, that doesn't necessarily disprove it. It shows that we're using different terms to describe what we're discussing. So that's something I also kept in mind as I was reading this. Continuing on. All, we are told, is inherent in the parental germ, and the conditions of the environment, added to the heredity and education, are sufficient to account for the phenomena of the human consciousness. Our parents, our environment, our heredity, our education, that accounts for everything there is to know about the human consciousness. Yet, in all these declassified documents, there is heavy research into that which has been disproven. It's fascinating. tests on all kinds of psychic phenomena, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, studies on different mental states induced by different psychedelics, and all kinds of things. Telepathy, all kinds of very spiritual psychic phenomena have been heavily studied and looked into. However, this says, and academic science disproves it. And they kind of just left it at that for the mainstream, which people have then adopted over the years into their perspective that it's a pseudoscience, that it's not creditable, that it's not worth looking at, and that anyone who kind of believes in it, if you are a strict man or woman of science, you wouldn't even entertain those ideas. Where my mind was open today through this process to the idea that that was tactical, and that maybe those people should actually pay a little bit more attention to what scientists have been doing on a covert level to understand these things that were actually publicly dismissed for a reason that was very, again, specific and tactical in the times where these conclusions were made for humanity, right? They're making this decision for us. Let's keep going. Man is a machine, a part of a still greater machine, which we call nature, and both man and nature are run on immutable laws. There is no free will except within certain clearly defined limits, which are defined by equipment and by circumstance. There can be no immortality. For when the machine breaks down and disintegrates, there is nothing left but the dissociated cells and atoms of which it was originally composed. This all may be true, but does it mean that there is no unseen activity happening that certain people call the term of, the vocabulary word for that is soul and the soul's activity? I think that's still very much, I'll stop interjecting. I'm just going to read this section and everything else will kind of like explain itself, I hope. Man is a machine, so we're robots. We're just little robots. And we break down, and when we break down, that's it. And we have no purpose, we have no meaning, we have no power, we have no gifts, we have no point. Sorry. This is so ridiculous to me how this is like kind of how people have been acting. When I said recently how people are kind of like understandably agitated right now and irritable. Certain people who have seemed very like their hand doesn't shake. You know, right now they're like on edge. It seems like in the workplace and around, people are kind of like real triggered. We're in a state of high angst and high like psychological angst right now. And in those documents, there's also, you know, documents that were released for times when that was kind of that fire and that angst was fueled so as to control the people in that situation. And it's really fascinating because, again, some of the tactics that were used are these metaphysical, psychological, very spiritual tactics from people that have that understanding of that as a baseline to be true, whereas the public are made to believe that our existence is very basic and very, this, and that we should just kind of like focus on our physical traits and attributes and our cultural differences and get angry at each other for those and focus on our fights and our differences. But these things that actually make us more gifted and powerful could actually cause more connection and more contribution towards creating societies and more resources and things that would help allow people to live more harmoniously. But that's been kind of kept under lock and key. So it's all really fascinating to me right now when I'm like going down this rabbit hole and just seeing how the people who believe the narrative that you're not special and you're not important except for your mind and your finances and your outer appearance in the world, your stature, your education, what I've learned and I've been programmed, that's what's most important. And those are the people who are being pulled apart when the narrative is swayed towards something that is psychologically distressing, because they can't anchor in to faith and belief and hope and things that are unseen, right, that are woo-woo, that actually open the door to our harnessing our power and our capabilities to overcome and to heal massively, to heal in so many ways. And it's such a sad thing to see that the logical person has had their minds systematically shut down to that which would actually cause so much healing for them. So that's the last little speech I'll give on that before we get into some of these documents. But my heart goes out to a lot of the people who are suffering right now. And always, we've all been suffering. Waves after waves. It doesn't matter if it's about a group that you don't identify with directly. You feel that pain. We've been hurting for a long time. And I think it fundamentally goes back to this issue. If we knew more about who we were, we would be able to do more with our life experience. This is why I think this study is so important. This is why I'm so committed to it. And it's not to, pick on our intelligence agencies, because I'm so grateful. And I'll just state for the record right now, I love the United States of America. I'm proud of who I am. I'm going to just be quiet. I appreciate the Freedom of Information Act too, so that we can research this and study this. And I think that we can go further now today with the information that we have, as we'll see in some of the reports where people were kind of trying to prove something and study something that they also were like widely dismissing or denouncing. So maybe the spirit of the studies as they were done in the past, but of course that doesn't mean that they've stopped, because even in the documents it talks about how they present them to certain individuals and then get the program renewed or nixed based on the findings. It's all really fascinating. That's why I was in that rabbit hole for 4 hours. All right, let's continue on. And I'm going to definitely have to break this up because I just can't stop talking. So I think we get the gist of this section here. Continuing on. Of the countless millions of human beings who have lived and loved, suffered and rejoiced upon our planet, like I was just saying, what is left today to guarantee to us their existence in the past, not to speak of their continuing existence in the present? A few bones, a few buildings, and later, traces of their historical influence. Later still, we note that they have left behind what they have left behind of beauty in the field of literature, of architecture, of painting, and in those forms in which they have embodied their thought and aspiration, their visions and their ideals. These are all things that are speaking to what we connect to the soul. The soul inspires intuited arts, visions, ideals, inspiration, hope, the fervor to dream bigger and to create architecture, paintings, all those things. That's connected to this side, right? But it's used in a very logical, intellectual way, because then use the Vitruvian man and like Leonardo da Vinci, that mathematical exactitude, right? To create something. There is room for both, but for some reason we've cut them off and said that they must exist separately. And what's fascinating about Alice Bailey and her work on esoteric psychology is she talks about how there will be a new psychology in the future where we will, instead of dismissing that which is esoteric, we will embrace it and incorporate it with that which we have known about the physical world and the physical psychology, and blend it with the the unseen with the seen, and then we'll have a full picture and we'll be operating in a way that can move us forward. When I was reading this whole thing, it reminded me of that scene in the movie, such a good movie, the space movie with Matthew McConaughey, Interstellar, where the daughter, she talks about, spoiler alert, it's an old movie, but she's trying to figure out why the professor hasn't solved this equation that's going to help them get all the people off of Earth, because, you know, Earth is no longer inhabitable, and they're sending off this group of scientists off into this other world that they've discovered through this wormhole, and they're going to try and repopulate that new planet because, you know, the Earth is going to like self-destruct. The food is going away and everything's like that. And her whole big dilemma is, I don't want to just have a few people go off and repopulate the next world with some little, they have these little embryos or whatever they bring with them, like little test tubes that it's going to be artificially inseminated or something to create the next world. She's like, why can't we also try to work towards a solution that gets all the people off of Earth alive now and come with us? And so she's left to work on this equation with this professor who sent her dad off to space. And her whole time she's wanting dad to come back, but she's like, then she realizes when the professor dies, like, he's been trying to solve an equation with the fundamental piece of the puzzle missing. He's just been ignoring it. And she says, you've been trying to solve this with one hand tied, no, both hands tied behind your back. And that's how I see this whole concept of trying to create division between the mental and the spiritual. Because as we learn through this whole thing, mental activity and the mental plane is where the seat of the soul is. The soul is on the highest octave of mental activity for the human being. So it's very much connected. They are not separate, and they should not be seen as one goes against the other or negates the other. They are completely part of the same equation. And if we want to really understand who we are and what we're capable of, we absolutely should not dismiss the unseen, and we should not dismiss the faculties of logic and law and order and politics and even like science and math and all of these things. Like, it's not either or, is what I'm trying to say. It never should have been. So, what's left behind of these people besides a few bones, architecture, paintings, all this? On the planet today, we find a humanity at all stages of development with mechanisms of varying kinds, adequate and inadequate. We find all of them, without exception, breaking down under test and limited by disease, or hiding the seeds of disease. The perfect equipment is totally unknown. Again, humans, we're damaged, we're brittle, we break down, we die. There's nothing. This is what is the message that's being sent out by those that say that there is no soul, there's no unseen life, and there's no credence to it. The perfect equipment is totally unknown, and every man harbors the germs of trouble. No man possesses a perfect mechanism, but owns one that must inevitably break down at some point, that is conditioned by an underdeveloped or overdeveloped glandular system, that hides at some point inherited disease and racial weaknesses, and that fails somewhere in some portion of the mechanism to meet the needs, physical, emotional, mental, of the day and hour. And one last time, I'll interject because I might not even have time to get to all the documents that I have up on my computer. One of the declassified CIA documents was of some files that has a personal note from someone that says, here, you might find this interesting, and haven't forgot about your personalities, and I'll forward more soon. And it's a document from this Lithuanian laboratory where this man had, at the time, this is probably pre-40s. His longevity, he's working on the study of longevity and long life, and he's 80 years old, and he's very preserved and all this stuff, and he's got people that are studying and proving that there's a scientist who has figured out how to see people's auras, okay, and use that information to determine all kinds of applications, like who should be married, what kind of work a person should do. They're different. All this stuff is going on right behind the scenes. And then he says that he has full confidence that there are also, another thing he's found out, ways to reverse the damage of radiation, exposure to radiation in human beings. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there. I don't want to go too far into that, but that's one of the things that's almost maddening, is the level of how much science can actually help us with healing and moving past some of these things that it's saying are inevitable for us, that are just part of our weakness. If we were able to, as a whole, as a species, work together to solve these problems that plague all of us and touch all of our lives, regardless of our race, our culture, our religion, our gender, our identity, all of that stuff, our politics, all that stuff. If we were able to like unite our forces towards trying to answer these problems together, and they weren't done in the privacy of certain laboratories, and then decided if it's going to be sent out to the public based on people who have filters of certain like agendas, and well, I don't want to like go against the medical complex, or I don't want to go against. Would we hold that back from ourselves? I don't think so. So I think it's fascinating for us to take another look at who we are for our own purposes. This has nothing to do with politics. CIA is still great, right? They're giving us this information. Now it's like, just what are we going to do with it? This was written in 1936. Of what does this speak? Of the sum total of the united cell life, of the environing group in which a particular form finds itself, of the life, impersonal and abstract in nature, which pervades it, of a vague group spirit that is expressing itself through the fourth kingdom in nature, of a temporary, and in that same document too, it also says that they're researching UFO activity and phenomena of the third kind. And that document again was pre-50s. Pretty sure. I'll leave a link to it. Of a temporary and impermanent self, or of an immortal entity who is the dweller in the body. Such are some of the questions which arise today, and in the last analysis, belief in the soul can be posited as being largely a matter of temperament, and the wish and desire of the ages wherein man struggled and suffered and relieved the strain of living by constructing a body of thought around a happy immortal being who was to be free eventually and finally from all the difficulties of physical existence. Again, this is saying that belief in the soul was thought to be, or is thought to be at the time this was written, by the academic science community, something that was done to make us feel better. So religious people were people who believed in an immortal being that was to be set free in order to be a defense mechanism against their suffering at the strain of living. The soul can be regarded as a beautiful vision or as a hallucination. For all that tends to prove its existence is the testimony of the many mystics down the ages to a contact and an experience which can be accounted for in terms of dream life, of brain lesions, or of escape reactions, but which rests on no sure foundation. No sure foundation. So again, they call things like astrology and all of this pseudoscience. And I always say, I go back to this point, well, what makes something concrete science? Well, it's verified by a scientific method. What is the scientific method but a series of tests? First, you pose a question, you form a hypothesis, you run a series of tests, you verify repeatable results, and then you form a conclusion. That is what we believe is science. Empirical evidence gives us the facts that we can then understand the world from in a better way. And these things can be proven, they can be scientifically tested, and these declassified documents show that there have been efforts consistently that have been made to do so. There's one document that details this whole experimental group that is studying remote viewing and all those things, telepathy and out-of-body experiences and all the stuff that I'm talking about. Like, that was done back, I believe, in the 70s. That document's from in the 70s. How much further could we get with that today? Like, and I'm sure we replicated that, but there were some findings that we could base that on, and we could do new findings, on today. I can't get into all this, but there is no sure foundation. The mainstream is told. Dismiss it. It is woo-woo. It is nonsensical. It is illogical. But it's not. So say the materialists and the upholders of proven scientific facts. Belief, verbal testimony, hope, curious, and inexplicable psychic happenings, the mass of untrained opinion and the findings of visionary people who were probably psychopathic cases are not enough to prove the fact of the soul. They prove only man's power to imagine, to build images and pictures, and to lose himself and his dreadful present in a dream world of a possible and ardently desired future in which frustration will end, in which a full expression will be achieved, and in which each man will enter into an impossible heritage which he has himself constructed out of the unrealized hopes and dim unuttered longings of his deeply hidden thought life. My goodness. Sorry, 1 second. Hello? Yes? I'll be there in 5 minutes. Okay, thanks so much. Bye. I have to edit that out, but I don't know. I don't feel like it. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Belief in God and heaven and in an immortal future have grown out of the ancient awe and ignorant terror of an infant humanity. Wow. And that's how, honestly, a lot of the spiritual community is seen today, as an infant or ignorant humanity who are just kind of imaginative and don't base anything in grounded facts, research, or evidence, which is completely untrue. And that has been propagated by those who have had an agenda towards separating the two for whatever reason. In the past, it was very political. It had everything to do with the Soviets and how that was deemed in all these documents. It's like over there they were like saying religion is crazy. We only deal with anything that has to do with science. And that was pushed by them. And then over here we are the home of the free and the brave, and our God-fearing country, united. We stand under the tenets of religion and everything like that. And it's just like that became politicized so heavily that now people are just kind of like blinded to the fact that this was propaganda, and that you have a right to look further, and that other people have a right to look further, and they have a right to not be looked at as credulous, or I don't know the right word, like just to be dismissed, right? This is study, and it is provable by a scientific method. And in fact, I would be so bold as to suggest that it might already have been proven long ago, since they've been studying this since before the 30s and whatever. I think they've got some conclusions by now. So finishing this up, I think I'm gonna close this video here because I'm not gonna get to all that. Dinner is on the way. So I'm sorry for these pauses. They saw in all the phenomena of nature, incomprehensible and terrifying, the activity of a gigantic man built on lines which were the projection of their own consciousness, and who could be propitiated or angered by the behavior of a human being. This is all talking about the idea of God as it was known in the 30s. The result of a man's effect upon this deity provided man's destiny, which was either good or bad according to the reactions of this God to his deeds. Thus we have the origin of the heaven or hell complexes of the present religious faiths. From this grew automatically the idea of a persistent entity called the soul, which could enjoy heaven or suffer hell at the will of God, and as the result of actions done whilst in the human form. As the forms of man grew in sensitivity, as they became more and more refined under the influence of the law of selection and of adaptation, as the group life grew closer and the group integration was improved, as the heritage of history, of tradition, and of the arts grew richer and made its impress, so that ideas of God grew. And likewise ideas of the soul and of the world. Man's concepts of reality grew richer and deeper, so that today we are faced with the problem of a thought inheritance which testifies to a world of concepts, ideas, and intuitions which deal with the immaterial and the intangible, and which testify to an age-long belief in soul and its immortality, for which there is no true justification. At the same time, we have demonstrated to us by science that all we can really know with certainty is the tangible world of phenomena, with its forms, its mechanisms, its test tubes, and its laboratories, and the bodies of men, fearfully and wonderfully made, diverse and different. These in some mysterious way produce thoughts and dreams and imaginings, and which in their turn find expression in the formulated schemes of the past, the present, and the future, or in the fields of literature, art, and of science itself, or in the simple everyday life of the ordinary human being who lives and loves and works and plays and bears children and eats food and earns money and sleeps. We're going to pick this back up here next time with this part where it says, and then what? Does man disappear into nothingness, or does somewhere a part of him, hitherto unseen, live on? Does this aspect survive for a time and then in its turn disappear, or is there an immortal principle, a subtle intangible entity which has an existence either in the body or out of the body, and which is the undying, immutable being, belief in whom has sustained countless millions down the ages? Is the soul a fiction of the imagination, and has science satisfactorily disproved its existence? We're going to leave it there on that question. And just to show really quickly some of the, at least one of the documents. Now I'll just share a couple of links to where I pulled them from, but let me go here. I can't do that right now. I'm too fired up and too distracted. So I'm going to cut this here. I hope that you have been able to follow me, and forgive me for my ranting and raving, but I hope that at this juncture you have gotten to know me a little bit and know that it's all for a purpose of thinking out loud towards getting towards the end goal, which is figuring out what we can do with information that can empower us, make us feel more confident, more self-assured, more self-aware, more able to go out into the world of mixed thoughts and ideas and energies with everybody that we're confronted with every day, and come in there armed with our own mental armor and knowledge of self with capital S, which is very much connected to the soul and our unseen life and all of our capabilities. And that is the goal, to inspire that search and to fuel that search and to partner in that search with one another who have these shared interests. So I will end this here, and again, thank you so much for watching, and check in the description for a few links to some of the, or at least where you can pull up and go down the rabbit hole of documents as well, and I'll put a couple links to specific ones that I read and mentioned in this video, but hopefully I'll be able to go into them more in depth when I revisit this for the end of this section. Thank you so much again for watching, and take care.